We're going to go to questions, but I'm going to ask Alistair and Roel to come up to the stage. We're going to bring a couple chairs on stage and have a conversation, and so we can start taking some questions for Nusha and bring Roel and Alistair into the conversation as well. Right, so there is a first. Someone have your microphone ready? Great. Is it a question for Nusha to start?
No, sorry, it was a question for Roel, because I was going to ask him one.
Oh, right. Okay, let's
if you don't mind, if that's
fine,
okay.
Yeah.
My name's Phil Sheeran. I work at the Motorpoint Arena here in Cardiff. My question was, obviously skills and talent are serious drivers or high priority drivers for investors, but what other drivers influence investors' choices? For example, health and well-being, leisure, entertainment, things like that. Are they important influencers when investors are making decisions about where they may go?
Well, the factors that you indicate basically relate to the concept of quality of life, if you living environment issues, and they can play a role. And let me first of all say, in many projects, they are not that relevant in the beginning, but they become more important as you go to final decisions. And it all has to do with the fact that individual people have to make decisions, and then subjective factors start to play a role. So the fact that it's quality of life in a city or in any location is perceived as more attractive than another, at the end of the process is part of the emotional factor that play a role in decision making. But if you look at it objectively, in many projects it's not one of those strategic factors. But there are exemptions, and the ones are that where you need to attract people to the location to come and work for you. I mentioned a couple of examples when you need to attract senior staff for a new R&D center somewhere. You want to be attractive in terms not only your financial package, but also the place where you live and where their family lives, and where the whole family can build a career. All those factors then start to play a role. So education, the city's leisure activities, as you said. But you have to bear in mind it means different things for different people. Now there's a clear difference between senior people and junior people. Junior have different ways of looking at life, want to enjoy it more. That's where factors play a role if you want to attract call centers, for example. For the call center itself, the factors don't mind, but if they want to attract talent to the call center, then those factors become important. So they become part of that decision making. So those are examples when you need to attract people from elsewhere into your location, into your city mostly, then those factors play a role. But if not, if you're fully relying on local workforce, basically, to put it blunt, it doesn't matter because the people live there. So you go and put a factory somewhere, you recruit from the local workforce, the people live there. And you can then make sure that you create a nice environment afterwards, but in your location decision itself, it doesn't really matter so much. Just for those where you need to attract people into your new environment. Yeah.
Gary Thompson. The question is for Nisha, and it's just about, obviously, fascinating presentation. Just looking at sensors and what impact are you seeing happen on specific cities which you're involved in from whether it's growth in products or commercialization of, some of the things which you're showing. What's the impact?
So a couple of the cities that we work with closely, well, one is Singapore, and I think in Singapore, there's a unique situation where, because of the government structure, they can actually mandate that companies kind of pool their data together. And so we've been able to do some really interesting work with Singapore where we can actually overlay various data sets, privately generated data sets on top of each other. So for example, looking at just like urban temperature, so that, the temperature in the city as a correlation with energy use of buildings and really visualizing heat island effect in the city, but then also weather data and how that impacts their transportation systems has been another interesting insight. Another thing that we've done with cities is looking at, again, cell phone data and telecommunication data, and then by plotting kind of mobility in the city, we can make recommendations for public transportation systems. So where are people actually like what corridors are they actually traveling through? Where are people aggregating at what times of day? So not only the actual routes for transportation, but also scheduling. When do we have an overflow of people? Your iPhone currently has more computing power than was used to send the first man to space to the moon. So we're generating a lot of data through all the the hundreds of sensors that are on our iPhone, and looking at that is kind of the best quality of information, I guess, that we can pull out on actual human mobility. Cities in Europe that are doing a lot of work with sensors, in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, we've just started a big project with them, and actually they're doing a lot of work with other labs at MIT as well, to really push Amsterdam as the next smart city. And then also in Copenhagen, one project we did was looking at all of the bikes or the bicycles that they have there, and how can we leverage that kind of infrastructure into a remote sensing object. So how can we begin to embed, let's say, air quality sensors on bicycles and create these real-time updating maps of air quality in the city? And that was something that we did with them, I think maybe like 5 years ago.
What comes in from that, they can then, use, companies can get hold of, and actually you can see SMEs grow from it because, the first to market in specific areas. You're seeing that?
Yeah, and so it really depends because, again, so as an academic institution, for us, when we build a partnership with someone in our consortium, for us, the most important thing is that whatever we're researching or what we're looking on as a priority, it's advancing science. And so we're not consultants. So there's a lot of back and forth at the beginning to actually establish the research project with whether it's a city or a company. But there have been times when it's actually spun off into something. So for example, the project with Copenhagen, where we were putting sensors on bikes, spun off into a startup called Super Pedestrian. Their first product is the Copenhagen wheel, which is just a bicycle wheel that is outfitted with all these sensors to map the city. And then kind of as a product for the consumer, it's also an assisted pedaling wheel, so there's a motor in there as well. So we've seen, so that's just one example. The BBVA project, the BBVA was actually able to take that tool and use it. They've spun that off into another company, and they're using that as a consulting tool for companies that want to set up kind of businesses or locations in Spain. So I would say it really depends on. Not so much at the moment. Not that I can think of off the top of my head.
Okay, well, that's one area where, there's a lot of movement.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
There's a question on your right.
Hello, Rebecca Gould, Head of Arts for the British Council in Wales. My question is for Alistair. I previous to this job, I've come home to Cardiff. I worked in London, mainly in London schools, on arts education projects, and I saw that massive change that you talked about from throughout the Blair Brown government of change to schools in London. And a lot of the schools, as you'll know, I worked in had sort of 24 to 30 different languages being spoken, and with the register being done in each one of those languages each day, there was a huge sense of sort of the global world and an understanding of that. And yet still, it seems in the UK, and particularly in Wales, we have some of the lowest take-up for modern foreign languages, and in Cardiff at the British Council, we run the Erasmus Plus programme, and it's still nowhere near, the take-up is still nowhere near some of our European partners on that. What can we do in Cardiff and in Wales to really encourage a more international, global thinking, outlook, aspirations in our schools, do you think?
Yes. I mean, I think the question about modern foreign languages, I think, is one which, I don't have an answer to at all, and I think it's one of those, the trite answer is that because English is so widely spoken throughout the world, that actually the need to learn other languages barely exists. I mean, you can go on holiday virtually anywhere in the world, apart from, one or two places, and English will get you by. I'm not sure that's in itself is an explanation, but I think it's part of it. I genuinely don't know. I think as a head teacher, I think when we were looking at, you know, at times when we had behaviour issues in school, the behaviour issues were greatest in the modern foreign language classes in the afternoon. I'm not, you know, and I'm not sure why, but our children struggled more with MFL than they did with any other subject. So I'm not quite sure what that is. I do despair slightly about Brexit because it seems to me that that is a fairly negative reaction towards, you know, how we should be looking at the world. I think in terms of, I think in terms of internationalism, I do think that young people growing up somewhere like Cardiff are incredibly fortunate to be in an environment where there is this diversity increasingly, and in other big cities. I mean, it's not true in all schools, but in some schools there is that. I think one of the big issues that one has in education is that everybody wants what their interest is to be part of the school curriculum. I used to have this thing that when I was driving to work in the morning, every day there would be a problem, and it was down to schools to sort it. It would be obesity, it would be drugs, it would be modern foreign language. And actually, that kind of piecemeal approach to things, we should do more finance education, we should do more of this, more citizenship. Actually, my last point was I think we need a curriculum which is planned much more strategically rather than is aggregated bit by bit. The Finns, who are renowned for their education system, they do have a model which is that every 10 years they revise their curriculum. They start that in about the 6th year of the cycle. They spend 2 years discussing it, thinking what they're going to do, 2 years getting ready to implement it, and then they start again. Now, again, Finland's very different from the UK, but there is a kind of a long-term view of that. I think we don't have that, and I think there are all sorts of things that could be fed into the curriculum, but it needs to be, I think, planned and coordinated rather than just, you know, some Secretary of State or some Cabinet Secretary decides we should do more of this, so we do more of that. It's not the way to do it. Not a very satisfactory answer, but I think it's something which is part of what should be a much more coherent curriculum and a much broader curriculum. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. I don't disagree with that at all, no.
I'm Nick Batchelor. I'm the Director of Education for Cardiff Council. Can I follow that to, again, a comment for Alistair and a question for you as well? First of all, I'd like to say thank you in your presentation for affirming the approach and the values and the aspirations that I think underpin the strategy we have set out across the city for delivering a really good education system, the kind of education system that a city like this needs in Cardiff 2020. And I'd like to say thank you to lots of people in the room who are part of shaping that and launching it back in June of this year. And you really focused I thought, really clearly, and I've heard you say this many times before, about the key importance of enrichment as part of overcoming the gap in achievement. And your quote about you raise achievement in the classroom, you narrow gaps outside the classroom. I think that's really well understood, and I just want to say thank you to people right across the city. I found such a willingness to be part of working with young people in all sorts of ways and building bridges with schools. So we've got a very strong business class programme running. We've had lots of people coming forward from sectors right across the city to become school governors. So that's hugely positive. My question, Alistair, is I absolutely agree with you about your point of rebalancing the status and value of vocational education. And we're trying to promote with partners across the city a much wider programme of apprenticeships and traineeships. And we're trying to get more clarity about how the apprenticeship levy that lots of you will be paying will actually benefit organisations. But have you got any steer about how we can take that forward in the policy context we have in Wales?
I think probably the short answer, Nick, is no. I think part of it, I think there are kind of, what would you call it? There are parts of this which are structural, and we need to get things in place, and we need to plan. I've just got this feeling that before we even do that, we have got to somehow raise the status and change how we view these things. Because my feeling still is that we view real education as academic education and A-levels in university, and everything else is second class. And that's obviously polarizing it, but I still think that is largely the view, and I think that's greater in the UK than it is in most other countries. So I do think we need to do a huge job somewhere about that, and I think apprenticeships are starting to make an impact there. I've always felt the name wasn't quite right, because it still conjures up for a lot of people carpenters and plumbers and hairdressers, and the modern apprenticeships are not that. They are something quite different. But I do think it always seems to be the poor relation. I think we focus on the academic attainment, we focus on PISA, we focus on all those things, and then we kind of think about, well, what can we do about vocational? And I think until we actually raise the status of that, and actually the politicians and the people who are in power actually commit to that and start to change the view of that, I think we will always be chasing the game. I think we never have got it right because it's never had the status. I think we need to get around to some kind of baccalaureate. We've lost the plot on what a baccalaureate is slightly, but there's something about a qualification at 18 that has equal status in a range of different ways that you can achieve that somehow I think is fundamental to this.
Someone has the mic. We're here.
Yeah. Hi, Steve Dimmick from Dupol. Question for Nusha. Nusha, it was very good to see Luigi, the MVP, there, all with his 2x4. Really interested to know from your side of things what recommendations you have for us to cut through the crap, something you'll be familiar with, to get tangible data. So what I mean is, as we're able to measure more and more and more things, what are your recommendations to actually get data that gives results that you can make decisions with?
Just to say, the puns are endless with working on Underworld, so I've heard it all. But absolutely, I mean, just to refer back, like, we know that data does not equal knowledge, and that does not equal wisdom. So we have a lot of data that we're generating and that we need to be kind of weaving through. What I find that has worked really well in our lab, and I mentioned it at the beginning, is really having an interdisciplinary team. And I think that that's something that is a little bit unique to how the labs are at MIT, or especially our lab, is that we, of the 40 of us, even though we're in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning, there's maybe only a handful of us who have a background in urban studies or architecture. And why that's important is because we look at things very differently. So I work alongside a data scientist, and the value in the data from his perspective or from her perspective is infinitely different than how I see it, or how an economist who's working with us sees it. So for the data scientist, it might be more about what she can do with the work and the algorithms that she can create, whereas for me, I'm thinking about it always from like the urban perspective and more what are the impacts that this can have on the city and city living, and if we're not currently if we don't have access to that data, then let's go out and generate it. And engineers similar. So I think being able to have a holistic view or a holistic kind of approach to a lot of these questions is really important as we move forward, especially in cities, because cities are just interdisciplinary by nature. There's so many things that come together to make a city run efficiently, from all the way from education to labor and skills and actual engineering and design and architecture. So that's what I would say is seems to be kind of the most important thing as we start.
I think there was one more. Was there one more question there? Where are we? Yes, there we go. Yeah.
Sorry. Tim Huxtable here from Hyperoptic. We're a data company who's been investing heavily in the infrastructure in Cardiff for some time now. It's really a question for Roll. How important is connectivity of a city, the entire city, on locating, new premises and investing as a private company in a city?
Well, it's getting. Is it working? Yeah, it's getting more and more important, obviously, already for years. And as companies become more technology focused, data centers, application development centers, speed of connectivity is extremely important. So having the right infrastructure in place, not for today, but for the next generation almost, thinking ahead in those terms as well, is becoming extremely important. It's part of the infrastructure that companies more and more expect that it will be there, rather than that needs to be developed once they have made a decision. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
I think I might just leave it there then for the comments, for the questions. I'm aware that tummies might be rumbling. But I want to say that there's a couple things. You just used the phrase "working alongside," and I think actually that's something that we've heard in one way or another. That's come out in everyone's talk this morning. This idea of working alongside, about mixing knowledge. It's an approach we've heard in transport and mobility, in terms of locating talent and recognizing talent, in terms of education. We know it relates to economic resilience and health issues, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's something, Phil started us off today talking about shared stories. And I think that there's a lot here about shared expertise and this removing the silo mentality and, crossing the aisle. So I think that's a really clear message that's coming out this morning, recognizing that we've got a varied and diverse skill set. We've got high, we've got low, and to go to the comment about modern foreign languages and ways of teaching, that through these different skill sets, we recognize we learn differently, we teach differently, and that knowledge is not necessarily so important for knowledge itself. I mean, I sure spent a lot of time figuring out why I was studying geography. Geography. Yeah, see how well I did. And I'm now an architect, and I sit there and I totally understand why the 45-degree angle is important. But, I sure didn't get that when I was however old I was. So it's not about the knowledge for the knowledge's sake, is it? It's about those transferable skills and the means of learning. And I think somewhere we've got to tie these threads together. Right, a couple of little housekeeping things before we release you down the corridor here. Lunch is served right down the corridor, that way, toward the bay, in rehearsal room 3. It has a more proper name as well, but that's what I know it as. From 1 o'clock, we're going to move into our workshop sessions, and in the spirit of dialogue that we started this morning, we're going to hope to continue that. There's 4 sessions, and on the blue pages in your book, you can see the times and the information about those sessions. Those sessions will be held in the rooms at the opposite end of the Millennium Center, so you just cross across the main hall to the opposite side. The first 2 sessions, you get to choose between one, and I don't envy you that. One is about, we have Gail Bodley-Scott from Cardiff Council talking about the cycling strategy and how that can contribute to well-being and quality of life. And in interest of full disclosure, I'll be in the room as well. Workshop 2, Gareth Harcombe talking about energy and sustainability, who's from Energy and Sustainability, again with the council, who's going to be talking about how the city can embrace science and technology, again, really relevant to what's going on today. From 35 minutes past 2 until 10 minutes to 4, we have 2 additional workshops. One from 2 people from the Volvo Ocean Race, Carla Nebrera and Miles Quitman, who are talking about measuring the impact of sports tourism. So that'll be quite good because, again, it links to a lot of things that have come up today, but we haven't really tapped into that aspect of it yet. And then workshop 4 with Graham Marshall, who's with Pro-Social Place Living Environment Experts. He's going to talk about health, well-being and the design of cities. So really talking about sustainability as the foundation for resilient and attractive cities. So I invite you to head to lunch first, and then we'll encourage you to head to the workshops after that. Thank you very much. Thank you.